Morning and welcome to the Conscious Capitalism Portland, Maine's ESOP 101, the Power of Employee Ownership. I'm Erika Gabrielsen Neumann. I'm on the leadership circle of Portland, Maine Conscious Capitalism Chapter and founder of the EG Group. I am thrilled to be here with you this morning. This is going to be a great discussion, and I know it because I had a sneak preview today as the moderator. This morning, you'll be hearing from three business leaders with big hearts and big visions who have built very successful, high growth and sustainable companies. They are successful in terms of people, profits, and how they handle our planet. Two are certified B Corps. All three are employee owned with employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs as they are known, which is the topic of today's webinar. So here's how today will go. I will introduce you in a minute to the panel, and then we'll hear an overview, the ESOP 101, from national expert Alex Moss. Then we'll hear about two different but successful paths from Maine leaders, Jim Van Fleet of Mainely Tubs and Fortunat Mueller of Revision Energy. After a short discussion among the panelists, we'll open up a discussion with all of you, so please hold your questions and comments until we get to the discussion part, which we have set plenty of time aside for. We will be recording this and making slides available to all. And again, please mute yourselves. I think everyone's muted. And now a quick note for those of you new to Conscious Capitalism Portland, Maine's chapter. We were founded in 2019 by Tara Jenkins and Elizabeth Ross Holstrom, who are both on this call. Welcome, Elizabeth and Tara, our fearless leaders. And we're part of a global movement that was started by John Mackey, founder of Whole Foods, and Dr. Raj Sisodia of Babson College. What drives our Portland, Maine chapter? Well, we're about 200 volunteer business leaders and entrepreneurs who believe in the power of tying purpose with profitability, social environmental justice in business, and making work more meaningful for positive change in the world. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about our panelists and have them say hello, and you'll be hearing their stories in a little bit. First, Revision Energy. Revision Energy has more than 250 employee owners working in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Since 2003, they have installed more than 7,000 solar energy systems throughout northern New England, leading the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Revision is ranked nationally in the top 25 rooftop solar contractors and #1 in New England. They're a certified B Corp with a score that has risen every year, rising over 30 points since its first certification in 2015, more than doubling the average ranking for B Corps. And a little side note on B Corp certification. An ordinary business of the same size as Revision, 50 to 250 employees, has an average ranking of 53.6. In 2015, Revision's first score was 94.4. In 2018, they scored 125.5 on B-Lab's rigorous third-party measures. And in 2019, Revision was named by B-Labs as Best for the World company in 3 different categories: overall, workers, and change makers. Incidentally, that same year, Praxis was also given high honors for Best in the World. Welcome, Fortunat.
Thanks, Erika. It's great to be here.
Mainely Tubs. Mainely Tubs is Northern New England's largest hot tub sauna and swim spa retailer. In 1993, Mainely Tubs had a small store on Marginal Way in Portland, Maine. That same year, Jim Van Fleet took the role of CEO. Mainely Tubs now has retail locations in Scarborough, Maine, and Rye and Bedford, New Hampshire, and has continued to be the largest volume store retailer in the world for the largest hot tub manufacturer for over 15 years and counting. Jim converted Mainely Tubs to a 100% employee-owned company in 2016. Since ESOP inception, Mainely Tubs stock has outperformed Apple by more than 4 times, proving yet again the value of team management. Jim has recently retired as CEO, but currently serves as the chairman of the board of directors. Good morning, Jim. Okay. And Praxis Consulting Group. Co-founded by Alex Moss in 1995, Praxis Consulting Group is based in Philadelphia and is one of the most respected firms in its field, working with hundreds of organizations on conscious culture, employee ownership, and shared prosperity. Initially, Praxis provided communication training and organizational development to employee-owned companies. For more than 25 years, Praxis has worked extensively with employee-owned companies. And today, the company works with nonprofits, socially responsible businesses, and other organizations interested in developing workplace cultures that maximize employee engagement and responsibility. It offers services in leadership development, coaching, union management partnerships, process improvement strategies, strategic planning, governance, and conflict management. Alex is a national expert on ESOPs. He serves as a trustee of the Employee Ownership Foundation. He is a past member of the board of directors of the National Center for Employee Ownership and served on the board of directors and the board of governors for the ESOP Association. Good morning and welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Erika.
Thank you all for being here. And now I'll hand this over to you, Alex, to give us an overview of what an employee stock plan is.
Sure, great. So we thought most of today is going to be about the stories, which it should be, because we want to hear the kind of lived experience of choosing to share ownership of your organization with your workers. And at the same time, every time we try to do that, people come back with questions about what about this, what about that? So we thought we'd start with a couple of minutes of kind of ESOP basics. And therefore, there's no way I'm going to cover the entire panoply of everything about ESOPs. But it's just, 10, 15 minutes to kick us off. Feel free to ask questions on that. But what we really want to get to is the stories from Mainely Tubs and Revision Energy around how, why'd you do this and how did it work and what would you do different? What have you learned? How'd you choose ESOP instead of other alternatives? So that's where we're headed. And I'm going to impose on you just a little bit of definitional framework for ESOP. I should say that I'm standing squarely on the shoulders of one of our participants here, Peter Pitagoff, and Peter probably doesn't even know that. But in a prior life, in a former organization, he and his colleagues were the inspiration for my early career into employee ownership and have always been a guiding light in this world. So just a nod and a thank you to Peter. And I also want to acknowledge John Murphy, who's joining us. I'm not in the business of selling ESOPs, and I think it's really important for our presentation today. We're not trying to talk anybody into it. What we want is we want informed awareness of different kinds of alternatives, because for some people, the conscious capitalism framework, you want this piece, and that's what you want. And you sort of look at your ownership structure and you say, there's other alternatives that align with that or are different from that. And you're going to sort of pick and choose different pieces. Some of us, including my firm, are benefit corporations. We're a founding B Corp. But that's not going to be right for everybody. And I think, as you'll hear from Jim and you'll hear from Fortunat, and certainly from me, there's not a right answer. And what we want is people to have really good, clear information so you can pursue these things and make decisions that are best for you. And if you really want a deep technical dive on ESOP, I'd send you to John Murphy from Atlantic Management in Portsmouth, who's joining us today. There's certainly plenty of other people, but John happens to be here, so I'll give him a quick nod. So what's an ESOP? I'm an organization development consultant. I'm interested in people and culture. And what we've learned after all these years is that organizations that really intend to engage their workforce, that really intend to build a business around culture, inclusion, and decision-making at appropriate levels, those companies are particularly good fits for ESOPs because it's an ownership structure that aligns with a set of cultural values. The ESOP itself isn't the cultural values. So I want to talk about what the ESOP is and isn't, but people do them, in my experience, for a range of reasons. But starting with the idea that we're trying to build and reinforce a culture. So what's the basic definition of the ESOP? Is it's a federally regulated retirement plan. It's like a cousin of your 401k plan. But instead of the employees taking money out of their paychecks and doing a salary deferral to buy stocks of outside companies, what the ESOP is a company contribution only mechanism where that funding, instead of buying outside shares, is purchasing the stock from the people that used to own it yesterday, whether they're the founders or the second generation. And I think when we get to Jim and Fortunat, we'll hear some very different stories of, was this a founder transition story? Was this ownership sharing earlier on in the process? So ESOPs work at different stages in the life cycle. The one place where they don't work is in startups, because you have to have a company that has some value. So you have a retirement plan. I'll give you a quick diagram of how it works, although we're not going to dwell on the transaction mechanics today. And it's really a unique form of ownership in the US. The rest of the world doesn't do this unless they're copying us. If you go to Italy or Spain or Japan or Germany, where they have other kinds of ownership sharing. In the United States, the most common form of ownership sharing that includes the most 14 million employees and 7,000 companies is this kind of retirement plan called ESOP. It's not a public company. You can have an ESOP in a public company, although that's relatively rarer. Mostly they're private firms that are much, much smaller, anywhere from a couple of dozen employees to a couple of thousand employees. And we've worked with them across that scale. And they're companies that are not strictly private owned in the sense that it's not just the ownership of one or two people anymore. The ownership goes into an employee trust, which serves as a shareholder. And I'll give you a couple of pictures on that as we go. So in functional sense, the ESOP is a buyer for the stock of people who are ready to sell, but don't want to sell. When we're doing employee ownership games, we often call it Snidely Whiplash. I'm dating myself. If you remember Dudley Do-Right, the bad guy tying the maiden to the train tracks. You're trying not to sell to somebody that's the wrong buyer. You're trying to keep your company in friendly hands. And the ESOP is a retirement plan that allows you to do that. So let's look at the next slide.
Okay.
Thanks. So what are the benefits? The first one is this notion that I already mentioned of sharing success, sharing opportunity. The guy that invented the idea said the problem with capitalism is we don't have enough capitalists. We want to share really broadly. There's a lovely 45-second video of Bernie Sanders and Ronald Reagan in 1985 extolling the virtues of employee ownership. This is ideologically ambidextrous, as Peter's old friend and my friend Chris Mackin will say. It appeals to the left, it appeals to the right, because we're bringing more people into ownership. It's a way of providing liquidity, a buyer for shares of stock in a company that doesn't want to sell to other buyers because you don't like who they are, and this is better in some cases when it fits. It's a way of keeping your company independently owned, preserving your legacy, protecting employees and the communities that you serve. There are two key tax advantages that are way beyond our time today, but I'll name them. One of them is that if you were to sell all of the shares in your company to an ESOP and become a 100% ESOP S corporation, then you literally stop paying federal income taxes and income taxes in most states. So I hope I get your attention with that. That's for real. That's something that Congress put in place in the late 90s to encourage the formation of more ESOPs. No income tax federally and in most states, if and only if the ESOP owns 100% or darn near close to 100%. The other big tax advantage of ESOPs is that those who are business owners in a C Corp environment, as long as you meet a variety of constraints, starting with at least 30% of the company in the ESOP, you can defer recognizing capital gains tax on that. So you have these tax advantages that aren't usually driving everybody's behavior, but all else equal, you want to take advantage of them. So be aware of that. We can come back and talk more about it if you have technical questions. How does it work mechanically? High level, the ESOP receives contributions. The employees don't put money in, and those contributions are used to buy shares. And the ESOP then takes the shares and allocates them into accounts of all of the participants, people who qualify to participate in the ESOP. And there are very strict requirements to make sure everybody's in. And then the value goes up or down every year. We hope up, but in most companies, it'll bounce around. And then after the participant leaves the company, typically at retirement, but there are very specific rules for what happens if you leave pre-retirement, of how you get your benefits. The value of the shares in your account is paid out to you, and the shares go back into the ESOP. There are innumerable mechanical variations of this. Big picture, The ESOP buys stock from those who didn't want to sell it to an outsider, divvies it up to employees who don't pay for it but get it as part of their retirement benefit. The stock hopefully grows, bounces up and down, and the value of that stock is paid out to employees later when they leave the company. Big picture. Let's look at the implications of some of the companies that have done this, and then we'll look at what changes and what doesn't. So here's a national map. Next one down. That's okay. Thanks. So here's, nationally, you don't want us to talk about all of these because we're going to hear two stories in detail. The biggest one out there is Publix with over 200,000 worker owners. So you can do this in a pretty big business. I'm on the board of one company that has about 4,000 employee owners. Relatively large, medium-sized, down to 20 or 30 employees. There's an ESOP in Portland with about 30 employees. So the scale is broad. The oldest one that I know is King Arthur Baking over in Norwich, Vermont. You know them. They've been in business almost since before there was the United States, since 1796. And their idea of the ESOP is they want to stay independently owned by their employees another 200 years. Thank you very much. They don't want to be owned, by Gold Medal or, whoever, whatever private equity firm happens to buy them from day to day. There's a range of other companies you probably, you eat Cliff Bars, or you've eaten Lighthouse salad dressing, or Kihi Foods is a big distributor that's also a B corporation. Eileen Fisher is a women's clothing designer that's also a B corporation, etc. Closer to home in Maine, there's the next slide. There are quite a few. We didn't try to get all of them, but we got a handful of some of the better known ones, starting with Revision and Mainely Tubs, Chinbro, of course, Daymark in Portland and Worcester, Johnny Selected Seeds, Sebago Technics, Moody's. You know a lot of these companies because they're in your backyard. You may not have known that they were ESOP owned, and not all of these, but most of them are 100% ESOP owned through the ESOP, but not all. So what changes and what doesn't? Formally, if you think about a conventional corporate structure, you have shareholders at the top, and if you own a share of Coca-Cola, you can go to a shareholder meeting, but you can't do much. You don't get to tell them, I want to start making yogurt, because they'll throw you out with your share of stock. It's not a shareholder right to run a company. People worry sometimes that ESOPs are going to result in kind of the breakdown of management control, which is, of course, not true. Shareholders don't run companies. They elect boards. The board oversees the company. I sit on 3 ESOP company boards currently. And then the company continues to be managed. The bottom half of this diagram doesn't change legally in an ESOP. What changes, if you hit the next one, Erika, is that instead of the inside and outside shareholders, the ESOP buys some or all of the companies, and often the inside and outside shareholders are done. They've sold and they go away. And the participants, the employees who meet the requirements, which is almost everyone, will join the ESOP and be represented by the ESOP trust. The trust is the shareholder. It doesn't want to run your company. The trust wants to know that you have a good board overseeing a good company, and then they want to stay out of your way, because what they're interested in is making sure that we're creating value for your employees and sharing with them when it's their turn to collect later in life. So that the top of the picture changes dramatically in the sense that we have a whole new shareholder in town. The bottom of the picture doesn't change very much at all. And in the middle, you oftentimes see people like me, outsiders who know something about this, sitting on a board of directors. It's very, very common to expand your board of directors a little bit to have 1 or 2 outside either business, industry, or ESOP type experts. So I think that's about it. Erika, what's the next one? Yeah, I think I hope that's enough of kind of a teaser of what ESOPs are to get us started. We wanted to get that on the table. And Erika, if you'd like, I can take one or a light question, but not a deep technical one if there's a burning one. I think what we then want to do is go to Jim and Fortunat and hear their stories, kind of relate it to this ESOP framework definitionally, and then help all of you think about, does this make any sense for me? Should I be thinking about it? What else would I need to know in order to make a really thoughtful decision about whether to go down this path? Erika?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. And like I said, we'll make these slides available, and there are more resources that we'll be sharing with you. So yeah, I would love to jump right in with Jim and Fortunat, starting with Fortunat, and have you both tell us what was happening when you made this decision. What was your role in the company? A little bit about the story. Why did you do this? We've heard from Alex what it is, and in general how it works, but we'd love to hear your why. And I'll start with you, Fortunat.
Great. Are you going to stop sharing your screen so we
Yes,
can
I'm
see
going to
faces?
stop
Or
sharing.
okay,
Yes, yeah.
not that everybody needs to see my face, but
Yeah.
thanks, Alex, and thanks, Erika. Yeah, so just a brief history of Revision Energy. As Erika said, we are we call ourselves an energy transition company. We are in the business of helping people and businesses transition away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. And we've done that in a variety of different ways through our history. We were founded in 2003 in Liberty in the mid-coast of Maine, which is a handful of employees. And at that time, our business was primarily solar hot water, wood boilers, a little bit of off-grid wind and solar, and all very much with a mechanical contracting focus. Was our goal at that time to professionalize what was kind of a rather unprofessional industry in renewable energy. And over time, that business has evolved. We are now, as Erika said, close to 300 employee owners in 5 offices across 3 states. And we still do a variety of energy services for our customers. Solar is the bulk of our business, and we build solar projects from very small, 1 and 2 panel systems and residential rooftop projects up to, larger off-site 20, 25 acre community solar farms and everything in between. We also work with customers to electrify the other end uses of energy in their lives, whether that is installing heat pumps for heating and cooling, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, both residential, commercial, and industrial, energy storage, and a couple of other things. Revision was a closely held LLC with 4 principal owners. As early as the very beginning of our business, we realized the success of our business depends almost entirely on the quality of the human beings working in that business and their passion and their dedication. And so, we, I think from the very beginning, tried very hard to make sure that we had the kind of business that rewarded excellence and that attracted and retained excellence. I think maybe 2009 or 2010, we had grown from just 2 or 3 people to about 40 or maybe even 50 people at that point. And we were at that point operating in Portland and in Liberty. That was the first time we looked at and considered sharing equity and ownership with employees. It was really clear to us that the business had a lot of runway and was going to grow a lot over the coming decade, and that the opportunity was limited only by our own excellence, and that the key to executing on that opportunity was in the people. So we looked into a handful of employee ownership options at that time, including ESOP, although kind of superficially, honestly. And we came away thinking these are all too intimidating for us. We are not mature enough as a business. We're not profitable enough as a business. We don't have the sufficient scale to manage the back office for any of these. And we did what we did at the time. Instead of actually sharing ownership, we created a stock appreciation rights plan, which I won't get into the details of, but essentially shares the equity upside with employees without any of the complexity of actually sharing ownership with the employees. And so that we had that STARS plan that we called it STARS because it was right around the SARS epidemic, and we did not want to call it SARS. So we called it a STARS plan. And that was a wonderful introduction for us in sort of a lightweight way to say, when this business does well and there is success, we want to share with people who are making that success. Yes, the 4 of us are hustling like crazy and working like crazy to make the business successful and have our capital at risk. But we also recognize it is not based on our effort that this business is successful or not. It's based on our collective effort. So fast forward a little bit, I think, as Erika said, in 2015, we took a step towards sort of formalizing some of the company values by becoming a certified B Corp. We were one of the first maybe the fourth or fifth certified B Corp in Maine. And that's been a wonderful evolution for our business. And then in mid or late 2016, we engaged in a conversation with a couple of other regional solar companies, actually two peer companies of ours, one in Vermont and one in New York, also B Corps, good friends of ours, people who we know very well and respect, about the possibility of putting our businesses together into sort of a regional mission-driven solar company. And wouldn't we have more impact at more scale? Partly driven by some uncertainty around federal policy, and also partly driven around the idea that we had three similar businesses in similar sort of scales, but some different individual strengths that we thought would be complementary. In that process, we went out and talked to a bunch of outside investors about providing some capital to make that merger happen, because we thought we don't want to take a step back. So we need some outside capital. And actually, the other two companies already, although controlled by founders, already have outside investors, whereas Revision, as I said, was closely held. So we spent about a year, 3/4 of a year, talking to investors. Mostly impact investors, family offices, and others who sort of are mission aligned. And we eventually attracted interest from a handful of investors who were awesome. The best investors you can have, not at all sort of sharks or frightening people. And yet at the end of the day, the four of us at Revision decided, you know what, we don't actually want to do this. We realized that even sharing 10% or 20% of the combined business with an outside entity who does not work in this business is not what we want. We want this business the value of this business to accrue to the people doing the work. And so, actually, the other two businesses went ahead and combined and have done some work since then. And we stayed independent, and that is sort of what turned us back to looking at ESOP. So we said, so if we can't imagine ever selling to an outside entity, then we got a couple choices. We can either own this thing forever, give it to our kids, which, who knows, or we can think about who would we want to sell it to. Okay, well, it's the people who are doing the work. And so we got serious about looking at ESOP. And in late 2017, we converted to 100% S Corp ESOP. And I don't know. I guess the rest is history. Maybe I'll stop there, and we can do the rest in Q&A. But that was sort of our evolution to get there. And it was, as I described, it's sort of a long and organic process. But once we found the idea of ESOP, we were totally convinced it was the right thing for Revision, and our experience in the last 4 years has only reinforced that in terms of who is it that is, at the helm, and who is it that is, ultimately benefiting if we are successful at what we're trying to do. So, like Alex, I'm not here to sell ESOP, but I will tell you that our experience has been really excellent.
Thank you so much. So great to hear the process and kind of get into your head, and also collectively your culture. So Jim, we want to hear from you. How did Mainely Tubs, and now you led it, you were the owner, and you are now the chairman of the board. What was that process like for you?
Well, it was a lengthy one on balance. And way back when in 93, when somebody who was representing the sale of an existing business that had fallen on tough times sat me down in a hot tub, and I said, Dave, this is great. Where can I buy one of these? He says, well, I have a Victor Kiam story for you. You don't need to buy the hot tub. You need to buy the company. Well, back then, that sounded like an moment to me. It was, but what I ultimately was driven by was experience that I'd had with LL Beans over the years. They have a customer service ethic second to none. I felt as if I wanted to do that in hot tubs, and turns out we were successful for a whole variety of reasons. Even though it's a niche product, and maybe only 4 or 5% of Americans now enjoy the products we sell, nevertheless was a fun business to be in, and it attracted employees who were who were interested in having fun and selling relaxation and wellness. And it probably grew over time because our customer service ethic was better than most anyone else in our industry. And since we've had national recognition of that, so that's kind of interesting. But along the way, we developed a sense of team culture, very much driven by working in harmony together and providing as a team. So for years and years, I've been promoting what has been a well-received culture amongst not just our employee teammates, but more importantly, over the customers at large, over 30,000 folks now who now enjoy our products. But what they recognize is that we're superior at taking care of people after the sale. And part of what my vision for the future was, I never wanted to get out of the business. I sort of wanted, as I considered retirement, to want a ramp as opposed to a cliff. And how could I consider rewarding people who had made the most successful retail hot tub company in the world what it is today, while at the same time enjoying a slow exit and getting some value for what we had produced over time. So it was value driven, but it was also, from a practical standpoint, I wanted a little return on investment. And I think that's an important element, that you don't necessarily give something away, even though participants in an ESOP don't have to invest their own money. And so I looked at all kinds of alternatives, from private sale to mergers. And for a niche retail company, there weren't a lot of comparables. There was a tougher way to find value. And so to learn, I learned from a fellow by the name of Harry Fraser, who many of you in the ESOP community know, and who is a gift to all of us in the ESOP community. He took me under his wing, as he does for many folks, I guess, and started to teach me a little bit about what ESOPs meant and how it might accomplish my goals of sharing with employees who built a company the ultimate value. And that would lead to some of the same practical benefits that Fortunat mentioned, is that we would not only retain good employees for longer, but we would start to attract people who were interested in ownership. It also, in my mind, gives us a compelling distinction in the marketplace of our industry for consumers. And I believe that consumers really appreciate and look for, these days, increasingly, companies where employees have an ownership, both philosophically and practically. And so I think it's a huge competitive advantage. When I learned some of the tax advantages of maintaining an S Corp and not having to pay income taxes as a corporation, that I felt would give us a distinctive advantage in our competitive marketplace versus lots of other folks. And we already enjoyed some distinctive competencies, but certainly the ESOP format gave us yet another opportunity, not just in the eyes of the consumer, but as far as the ability to create a legacy business. I didn't want to move something to where I had taken it and then have it fall apart as I phased out. I wanted something that would grow and prosper, if for no other reason than I made a commitment to now over 30,000 people that if they bought a product from us, we'd take care of them, period. And they couldn't just rely on my home phone number anymore in order to ensure that we would do that. And I needed a perpetual motion machine, if you will. And so the ESOP has all of the characteristics that created a win-win-win opportunity for those who had created the value, for the customers who had enjoyed the product, for me and my family who had created this enterprise. So it was just a neat fit. And so I think questions are really more important than our stories, but I'll tell you, the community at large, I joined the NCEO, which is one of the national membership organizations. And from there, I gained also an incredible amount of knowledge. And for a very modest investment, you can go to conferences, you can get into an amazing, a plethora, if you will, of resources that will help you better understand what the advantages and disadvantages of this structure is, as you might consider it for yourselves.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Fortunat. And again, we have resources that we'll be sharing at the end of this. Some of you are experts in your right and others are new to this. So Alex, I want to hand it over to you. These are two main stories. You've worked with hundreds of companies. You've worked nationally. How do their stories fit in with what you've seen or trends that you've found in the both why companies do it and how they do it?
Well, I have to say right off the bat, I have a little bit of a filtered view. There are many ESOPs that do this primarily only for liquidity. In other words, to find a buyer for the shares and for tax advantaged financing. And those are very powerful advantages to an ESOP. Those folks don't tend to call a company like ours, which we're in effect kind of worker owner management consultants on organizational issues. So I don't see that other crowd as much. And I'm not criticizing or passing judgment on that. I'm just saying that there is a world of ESOPs that's really about financing liquidity, end of story, thank you very much. And those ESOPs stick around for a while, and eventually another form of ownership is smarter and somebody buys them. That happens all the time. The world that we live in goes everywhere from King Arthur Flour in Vermont, King Arthur Baking now, that's been around for many, many years, companies that have been employee-owned, Karis Reels, the kind of companies that have been here and that have plants all over the country and have been employee-owned because the founder said, I really want to do this. Well, go to San Diego and go to Taylor Guitars, the guitar maker that just put their ESOP in and sold 100% of the company to the workers, including the workers in Mexico, by the way, which is pretty interesting. And they just did that in January of this year. So, you can go to the four corners of the country and everywhere in between, and you'll find employee-owned companies. And these stories that you're hearing from Jim and Fortunat, there's some nuances that are quite different. And I want to go back, Jim and Fortunat, to this question of your role and the transition of leadership, because sometimes we see that the ESOP is a way of the founders selling and really wanting to step out. And ESOP's a terrible solution if you want to get all your money at the maximum, scrape the nickels off the table and sail around the world tomorrow. You can get that money from another buyer, from a strategic or a PE kind of buyer. And ESOP's a better fit for owners, for founders that really have a little bit of patience, that can get paid over time, that really want to stay involved at the right level, whether that's a board level. And sometimes those founders aren't going anywhere for a long time, and they're really going to remain embedded in the business. And we see both versions of those ESOPs, the founders or prior owners that are really taking a big step out. And Jim, I may be, too broad in that characterization, but you've really taken a step onto the board and out of management over these last years. And Fortunat, you really haven't. You and the folks who sold at Revision have really stayed much more involved. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because it's an interest. You don't have to go one way or the other, but there are different kinds of good stories. And my stories match yours in companies all over the country. So I'm happy to talk more about it, but let's hear a little bit more about what's your experience been like as leaders and how has it affected you and your role?
I think one of the most important things that I started to realize, and I was a late bloomer, if you will, to exit planning in '08 when I was 60, we had a recession, and we were all grappling for how to survive. And so all of a sudden I was 65, when I realized. But along the way, I knew that if I wanted to have a legacy business, I needed to build an infrastructure that, and when somebody said to me, John Murphy, you'll appreciate this, when somebody said to me, your business is more valuable, Jim, if you play more golf. I said, but remember, it still has to perform. And I laughed at that, but I did realize that, and I'm sure, Fortunat, you've done the same in a different way, but to develop a management bench strength is a really key, it's a value criteria as well, to be able to create something that can perpetuate itself without the single visionary that got it to where it was. So that took, the investment required potentially lower levels of profitability, because you're buying competency in management and as well as functionality, whether finance or marketing or operations. And those things have a potential to reduce profitability. And yet, if it's done properly and led properly, it can lead to growth, which far surpasses in additional margins the expense associated with that. So if I had a piece of advice, that I have a lot, and I talk too much, but it is, don't hesitate. For those of you I was a $7 to $9 million business as I got into the real details of this, a $10 million business when we finally converted. But I chose to invest in bench strength across the board in our business, and it paid really handsome dividends, because I could convince the likes of John Murphy that it might be able to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, and I think our experience, as I said, I had three business partners, and in terms of where we are in our individual careers, and we are separated from one end to the other by about 30 years in age, and so we are in different places in our career across the spectrum. And one of the things that was really attractive to us, and I totally agree with Jim in the value of investing in sort of management infrastructure, and we have been working on that since the beginning. Our business is still growing quite rapidly, and the industry is moving quite rapidly, and so we're doing that constantly. One of the things that really appealed to us about ESOP is that we could sort of settle the ownership question, the ownership question, independently of the management question. I mean, and they're not actually totally independent, but you can do them on two different timelines. And so we said, once we will have built a 40-year ownership plan, a plan that is durable through a generation or more. And now we can focus on the management transition and succession planning piece on whatever timeline makes sense for the managers in the business, without worrying about how am I going to buy my partner out when he decides he no longer wants to be active in the business, and what does that do to sort of the liquidity position of the business and other constraints. And so that was incredibly liberating for us to say. I mean, we install infrastructure that has a 30-year life, right? We are selling people on 30 years of energy savings from a solar project. And so to have a business structure that has sort of a similar timeline is incredibly attractive to us, and also I think to our customers who say, these guys are going to be here for 30 years, and so I will buy a 30-year asset from you.
That's a perfect segue. When I introduced you and I said you had big hearts and big visions, that's really what struck me. John Mackey uses the word love when he talks about capitalism, things that you don't hear about. And as you were both presenting, and Alex, you were talking, that what comes to me is sustainable and ethics. So scraping nickels off the table and selling doesn't seem quite ethical and sustainable to me. So can you talk a little bit about the other part that conscious capitalism and B Corp is, that there's the naysayers say that you can't be profitable and do the right thing. But can you talk about performance again? Jim, a little bit about how well Mainely Tubs have been doing. Fortunat, you just said you're in growth mode. And then Alex, I think I skipped a slide, but you have some incredible metrics on,
Yeah.
as Lucy from the Peanuts says, cold hard cash. We're in business. It's about capitalism. It's about growth, and it's about prosperity. So let's talk about money. Starting with you, Jim.
Well, yeah, thank you. For us, that $10 million company in 2016, we converted at the end of 2016, will this year be somewhere in the gross revenue between 25 and $30 million. And it might even be more if we could get enough product. But hot tubs, swim spas, saunas have been winners. Wellness products have been winners in a pandemic. We've been in the right place at the right time. But that kind of growth wouldn't be possible, nor the concomitant growth in our earnings and our profits wouldn't be possible unless the participants recognize and appreciate that they're doing this for themselves. And when that takes over, when that understanding and appreciation takes over, it is amazing how behaviors become consistent with profitability and become better. Our team becomes better at serving customers. And of course, that has a self-perpetuation to it, right? Because consumers, people say, why is Mainely Tubs in a small market the leader in the country, almost the world in what you do? And I say, well, how many people have 30,000 salespeople? That's what happens when employees understand the value of what they're doing and they get all on the same page. All of a sudden you have opportunities to dominate market share. And it is responsible to the employees. It feels like, as a fiduciary, which is where I am now, it's the right thing to do. And customers love it.
Yes, Jim, I'm in the market. I'm in the market for a hot tub, Jim. Yeah, you'll be hearing from me. Maybe I'll wait till your supply goes back up. Our experience is similar. We try hard not to fall into the trap of measuring our impact and performance exclusively by financial metrics. I mean, one of the challenges, of course, for businesses is that dollars and cents are easy to measure, and so they're tempting to measure, or they're tempted to measure exclusively. But we do measure our financial performance. We have to, as a fiduciary obligation to our shareholders, but also because it's, our profit is the lifeblood of the business. It's what allows us to do the work. Like Jim, revision will be sort of both top and bottom line between 3 and 4x the size we were when we became an ESOP in 2017. So, it's a rocket ship. And, not all of that is because we are employee owned. Obviously, there are other macro factors in play, and we'd like to believe that we've done some things right even before the conversion. And obviously, the awareness of the things we're selling and the importance of the work we do is growing all the time. But having the best staff and the most motivated and passionate team certainly doesn't hurt when you're on that kind of a rocket ship.
And that ties out with the data. There's a couple of slides. We're going to give you a deck. It's got more background than we're going to have time to get to today because we mostly want to talk today. But there's all kinds of data that says that employee-owned companies outperform competitive firms on all the usual business, return on sales and equity and productivity and all that stuff. But you could do all of these good business practices and not share ownership. And the guy who runs the National Center for Employee Ownership, Corey Rosen, says that he'll do meetings like this, and somebody will call him and say, "This sounds awesome. I want to create an ownership culture. I just don't want to give them the stock." And Corey's response to that is, that's like inviting somebody else to watch you eat dinner. I'm going to give them a sense of food, right? And it's not that the ESOP's the only way to go. It's that if we're trying to create a culture of shared ownership over business performance, then the actual ownership kind of matters. And the sustainability idea particularly appeals to me. We became a B Corp back in 2007, 8, whenever it was that they started. I think Fortunat for similar kinds of reasons, because we can't measure our performance in financial terms. Yeah, we want to make money, but you breathe oxygen to live. You don't live in order to breathe oxygen. You need profit to do the things you care about rather than the other way around. And we wanted a way of having some metrics that would help us understand whether we're hitting some of the kinds of impact goals that we'd like to aspire to. And we get fantastic scores on some of those benefit corp things, but we get terrible scores on others. We get on airplanes and fly around, or we used to, a year ago. And so we have terrible environmental scores. And, then what do we do about that? So it's not that we've got it all figured out. It's that it gives us a framework of evaluating. And I always go back to, the UN Commission on Sustainability in the mid-'80s defined sustainability as providing for the needs of today's generation without compromising the needs of the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. We want to take care of today, but in doing so, we don't want to undermine the ability of tomorrow's generations to take care of themselves. And if we have these impact ideas in our businesses, we have to reflect that at some level in our ownership structure as well. And that's very compelling to me personally. If you drop that all down and really simplify it, Jonas Salk, the guy who invented the polio vaccine, if you go to the Salk Institute, the first quote that you'll see on the first stone there when you walk into the Salk Institute is, "Our greatest responsibility is to be good ancestors." And I think for a lot of us in this conscious capitalism realm, we're trying to do this business stuff in a way that's good for today and that really positions our companies to create the opportunity for good in the future. And, it speaks to us. And I not every ESOP's about that, but I think in this kind of group, that's what we're looking for.
It also, picking up on a theme that Fortunat mentioned a little while ago, we have started to see more and better candidates for team members as we grow, and we need more staff. And to have this as a long-term ownership as part of the reward system, to say nothing of the culture, is a pretty attractive culture to work in. It's really given us a leg up. We're blessed with more applicants of higher quality now as we seek new employees.
We have a lot of questions on our docket that we can keep asking ourselves, but maybe you have some for us. We've got a half an hour or so. What questions would you have for Fortunat or Jim? And Erika, jump in. I mean, we have a whole laundry list of discussion questions, but maybe you have some too.
Yeah, that's great. You can either unmute yourself or probably put them in the chat, and we'll go from there. While we're getting questions from everyone, I will ask what, Alex talked a little bit about what changes structurally, and I think it would be great if that was a 3D slide, because it's so hierarchical, but it's like you should be able to turn it this way because it makes it completely different org structure. But what surprised you? Was there any noticeable change before and after at each of your companies, before the ESOP and after? Or did you feel like it was a...
For us, we were a smaller group, and maybe it was easier to gauge what was, but I think from the original introduction at the Christmas party, when I came in and said, "Well, Sarah and I have just come from the closing where we sold the business, and I want to introduce you to the new owners." And I said, "Look to your left and look to your right and shake the hands of the people who are now becoming the beneficial owners of Mainely Tubs." And that was a feel-good moment. And I think it set it set a tone for, even more so, hey, we're all in this together. And as we try to explain on a regular basis how value is created, in many respects, it's a financial education for all of the participants to understand. but it takes some time. It's not an instant transformation, and here we are now in our 5th independent year as an ESOP, and it's gaining in both knowledge and traction. And some of that relates to compensation systems that we put in place, the mechanics of our ESOP, which have some incentives for key players to drive value. It's a very quantitative kind of approach, but it works. And I think that's the way a lot of companies. We're not a B Corp, even though we love the values of B Corps. We haven't gotten to that point. We're really a company that's driven by our finances and our performance, and I don't think we're unusual in that regard.
I think the B Corp idea scares a lot of ESOPs because it ties your hands in some ways. We love it. We like how it ties our hands, but it creates a set of expectations around stakeholder oversight that we like a lot, and that some of our clients, it makes them nervous. Even the ones that have very, very strong social impact missions want to do that on their own terms. And what I find, and I'm curious, Fortunat, about your experience, also what I find is I like having it behind us, but it's not, the two of them do different things. The ESOP is an ownership vehicle, and the B Corp is a set of both legal standards and operating standards around impact. And Fortunat, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how do those things connect and how are they different in your mind? Because most ESOPs are not B Corps. There's a whole subset of several dozen that are, but most are not. And I think that's a very, it's either a deliberate choice because they looked at it and didn't like it, or it's not a deliberate choice because it never would have occurred to them.
Right. Yeah, we talked about this just a little bit actually at the last Conscious Capitalism presentation when Neil Kiley presented about having become a B Corp at Androscoggin Bank. And as you say, there's some overlap. The sort of B Corp approach is a multi-stakeholder approach that considers the impact of the business on a variety of stakeholders. Two of the very important stakeholders in that multi-stakeholder approach are employees and owners. One of the sort of simplifying benefits of employee ownership is you collapse those two critical stakeholders into one, and now you have sort of one less disparate interest to balance. But as you say, when we, Erika, to your question of what changed or what didn't change, we'd already been talking a lot about shared upside and also about acting like an owner, behave like an owner whenever you're making a decision, because we share in the success of this business when we're successful and when our customers are happy. When we became an ESOP, we got more explicit about that for sure, and we've done a better job of creating sort of common norms and standards and language around that. One thing we did sort of muddle through or have to explain, I would say repeatedly over the course of several years, or have to sort of come to a common understanding about, is that employee ownership is not the same thing as democratic management. And as Alex's slide showed, what you do when you become an ESOP at a minimum is sort of close that hierarchical loop, right? So instead of this hierarchy, now you have a circular thing where ultimately the employees are represented by the trustee who appoints the board. But it's a slow and indirect cycle. It does not mean that we take a vote, should we be running a radio ad or a TV ad, and all 300 of us put our hand up and decide that together. We still rely on our marketing team to make that decision, and it does not mean that we take a vote even on, big strategic choices. Should we go into this market? Should we not go into this market? We happen to have a culture where we do have lots of opportunities to have those conversations and gather input, but at the end of the day, we're still run by our management, who is appointed by the board, who in turn is appointed by ESOP trustee. But sort of the direct. So we spent a fair bit of time sort of coming to a common understanding of when are you acting as an owner? Like, we want you to act as an owner in your sphere of influence all the time, have the ownership mindset, but your actual owner's lever, you're only pulling a handful of times. The rest of the time we are doing it together because that's the kind of company we are, and we are sort of gathering input and having a relatively flat hierarchy because that's the kind of structure we prefer. But that may or may not be true in a lot of ESOPs, right? There are many ESOPs who are still very hierarchical internally, and where it's simply a financial transaction, as Alex said, which is fine. And I think that's that transaction comes in all flavors, and I think it works for different businesses in different ways.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really different about an ESOP from another form of ownership that's much more common in the rest of the world, which is a cooperative, is that in a co-op, people buy in and they buy one share and they have one vote. Now, they're still usually not voting on operating decisions. They're voting on governance decisions. Whereas in the ESOP, the shares are held in a retirement trust, and you get all these retirement, both benefits, but also kind of the overhang, the administrivia of running a retirement plan. And in a worker co-op, you don't have any of that. Could you talk a little bit, it may be about co-ops, but what else? Knowing that you didn't want to sell to PE or outside buyers, my kind of Snidely Whiplash character when we're teaching ESOPs to employee owners, we always have that guy out there threatening to buy our company if we don't do something better. Can you talk a little bit about why, relative to other ways of direct ownership, cooperative ownership, which we love, but it's a different kind of structure, what about the ESOP appealed to you, and what are you learning in that you'd want people to know about, sort of heads up, as you get into this?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Jim, if you want.
Go for it.
We did consider a handful of other options, including cooperative ownership, when we decided to pursue ESOP. Revision is actually a part of a purchasing cooperative, so we are part owner of a national purchasing cooperative of about 50 solar companies of roughly our scale nationally, and we buy solar products together to get a good price, and we share a lot of best practices. And about a quarter of those 50 companies are themselves worker-owned cooperatives, and so we have a lot of inspirations and peers, including South Mountain Company, whose founder wrote the book on cooperatives, the companies we keep, John Abrams. And John is now a friend and a mentor, and he's an incredible person. And actually, my business partner, our fourth partner, Dan, when he joined our business, first as an employee and then later bought in as our fourth partner, on the day he handed me his signed offer letter, he also handed me John Abrams' book. That was before I knew John, about the companies we keep, which details their transition to cooperative. So the idea is very appealing to me in lots of ways. Two reasons why we chose ESOP and we thought it was a better fit. One is that we really wanted our ownership to be inclusive, and typically in cooperatives, some fraction of the employees end up as owners, and there's some sort of relatively long trajectory to get there, candidacy period, and then, as Alex said, a buy-in that requires some sort of cash contribution, sometimes finance, sometimes coming out of people's pocket. And our business, while we do other things now, we have a finance business and we have a development business. We're still a little over half of our co-owners are tradespeople. So we're a blue collar business, and so making the ownership structure accessible to all the different people in our business was super important to us. And we thought ESOP did that well. It doesn't ask anyone to write a check, and because it's relatively flat in terms of how it distributes ownership. And then frankly, for where we are and where our industry is and where our business is in terms of maturity, we felt like not having sort of the fully democratic ownership piece would be an asset versus a liability for us, in that our industry is moving very quickly, and we believe that having so streamlined decision-making and strategic apparatus is an important differentiator for us. And so we like the fact that there's sort of a little bit of an arm's length between the ownership, which is broadly shared, and the board and the management, which is still a little bit more tightly controlled.
From in our case, a smaller business, you look at things like, is there a next generation coming through? And in my case, I had two kids. Becca recruited delivery kids from the high school originally to deliver hot tubs, and Jeremy created our first website. But both of them realized that they wanted to be involved in doing their own thing as opposed to dad's thing. And many of you may find that happens. It's not uncommon for that to happen. Because we were such a niche retail business, there were and volatile, if you will, as consumer behavior changes. There was less interest. We weren't an easily marketed outfit. There were no roll-ups in our industry, and so some means by which we could gain value while also sharing value was very important to me.
And you could do that, some of the tax benefits that benefit ESOPs, and particularly the C corporation tax-free rollover benefit, are available to worker co-ops. They're less commonly used in worker co-ops, but they're certainly available. The S corporation tax-free status is really unique to ESOPs, and that drives a lot of this. Again, people not strictly wanting to not pay taxes, but wanting to do what's right first and foremost for their people, and then take advantage of the tax treatment that's available is very compelling. There is another form other than stock options or selling stock directly to employees that I would just name, and beyond our ability to get into in detail today. But if you go to the UK, they put the shares into an employee trust. It sounds like an ESOP, but it's not a retirement trust. The shares just live there. And the purpose of the trust is to hold the shares and never sell them. So if you go into sort of the Neiman Marcus of the UK, it's called John Lewis Partnership, and it's a worker cooperative. And literally, there's only one person in the United Kingdom that can break that partnership. Think UK. Who's the one person? Yes, the Queen. Literally, legally under British law, only the Queen can take that away. And it will last 120 something years because there's laws against perpetuities. And then nobody knows what's going to happen because they don't have a legal framework for what happens after the first 120 years when it goes away. Around the world, there are different kinds of structures. The tax benefit for the S Corp ESOP is so powerful that you see a lot of it. And you can even have companies like, once again, Nut Butter in upstate New York is a co-op that converted to an ESOP structure but has a co-op mechanism. Or Karis Reels in Vermont is 100% ESOP, but has embedded some electoral democracy into their board, not complete, but some, because they really value employee input, not just at the operational level, but also at the governance level. So there's no one right way to skin a cat. I think most of our clients run their firms the way they used to. They haven't changed dramatically, but they spend a lot of time doing the things, Jim and Fortunat, that you're talking about, trying to help people understand how they impact the numbers, how their behavior affects our ability to continue creating financial benefits. And then the bigger question is, how does that allow us to create a kind of employment environment that's really compelling, that people want to stay? So I think if we create a work environment that people love and they don't want to leave, we can attract and retain great people. Okay, everything else pales because now we're winning. And in fact, in our business, most of our businesses, and we're not setting up ESOPs, we're helping employee-owned companies do that kind of what we think of as ownership culture development to make sure that they are places that people love to work. And I think it's a really solid B. It's like we're not winning in all of those, but we're trying.
That is a perfect segue, because we had a question from Elizabeth, and we have a diversity of backgrounds on this call, but one of the things that Elizabeth's known for is founding a company that is looking at culture and looking at the value of culture and measuring the metrics. Because again, back to Lucy from the Peanuts, there's money connected to your people. There's a value of turnover, it's tracked, and so not only does it make you unsustainable, but there's a financial cost too. So Elizabeth, you had a question a while back. We got going. I wanted to make sure we got to your question.
It's great. Thank you. Actually, I have two. The first is to you, to those on the call that maybe even beyond our panelists that are experienced, maybe there are others that have ESOPs or are thinking about it. My question is around the employee experience and around what you've noticed since you moved to this model in terms of what kind of behavior, or is there a story about employees coming together in a way that you weren't expecting as a result of being owners that has made a difference for your company? So that's number one, if you can have any story about that, because I think that's compelling. And then number two, just broadening to the other voices in the room. I'd love to hear other voices around what we're talking about. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Elizabeth. A couple of things come to mind, and of course, it's always hard to separate sort of what is, draw a straight line from ESOP to this thing happen. But we definitely have seen sort of an ever increasing engagement and feeling of ownership, and that manifests in a number of ways. Two that come to mind, or three that come to mind, relatively recently, or in the last 2 years or so for us. Just briefly. One is a couple of years ago, a handful of employee owners came to us and said, life happens to people, and people have unexpected expenses. We would like to figure out a mechanism within Revision to sort of have a way to pick people up aside from sort of circulating a GoFundMe. Hey, my car broke down, or I had a fire in my house. And so as an employee-led effort, we now have a co-owner emergency fund where people make voluntary contributions weekly, and it builds over time. And then if somebody has an unexpected life event that puts them in a financial burden, they get a no strings attached check from this fund that says, hey, like it's basically sort of GoFundMe kind of money, and entirely run by employees. I mean, I have nothing to do with it. I don't decide who gets the money. I don't nominate who gets the money. The only limitation is that we can never give away more than half of the total money that's in the fund to a single participant, and that somebody has to ask on your behalf. Although I guess you can ask on your own behalf too. So that's one example. Another would be, I think this past year, Revision did an awful lot of racial equity and JEDI kind of work, including much more visible external communications about that stuff than we ever have before. And to be frank, I don't think we would have been brave enough as a closely held company to do that. And I think a lot of that was driven by people saying, hey, I own this company. I want this company to speak to my values. And I want us to be not just doing it internally. I want us to be talking about it and pushing other people to do it too. And so to me, that felt like, again, hard to say if it's directly connected to employee ownership, but it certainly felt that way to me, that people feel empowered to say the company should speak the way that I speak about injustice.
I mentioned earlier that one of our accountabilities to the public at large was always my home phone or cell phone number on the answer machine on the website. And in the last year or two, I watch salespeople, service technicians, people who interact with our customers do the same thing. They give them their home, they give them access to them. So they view their responsibility for accountability to the customer as in the same way that I looked at it for so many years. And that's just wonderful from a business perspective. And it led us to, and back when I was still CEO during the start of the pandemic, even before we realized there would be a PPP loan opportunity, I made decisions that everybody was going to be on the payroll and paychecks were going to continue because it was the right thing to do by a company that's owned by everybody. And luckily PPP came along and that, it sort of justified and paid for that decision. But still, it was a decision that emanated from the idea of common ownership as opposed to a bottom line.
And I'm going to take the sort of anti-ESOP position on this to be the devil's advocate for a minute. You can do all those things without being employee owned, right? You don't need an ESOP to be a great company. You don't need an ESOP to have a great culture. You don't need to have an ESOP to run the company with a stakeholder mindset. You don't need an ESOP to be a B corporation. You don't need, et cetera, et cetera. I think the question is, somebody is going to own your business. Right now, that's you, if you're a founder or business owner. Eventually, somebody else is going to own it. Because the only way that you're not going to sell your business is if it fails, or if somebody actually discovers the fountain of youth and immortality. And I'm not betting on B, and I'm hoping not A. So I'm hoping we're all going to be confronted, all of us, with this challenge of ownership sustainability. We have to answer the question. That's not an option. This is an answer, not the answer. It's an answer to how to keep ownership sustainable, not because the ESOP requires you to do all these things that Jim and Fortunat are talking about, but because maintaining independent ownership under that umbrella, you get to do these things that continue to make your company brilliant. And if there are other ways that are better in your context to have that umbrella, to protect that culture, to protect your ability to run a good business, then do them. The ESOP is a way that for some companies works really, really well as an ownership umbrella under which you can do all this cool stuff. And I think what we're pitching here is protect your ability to do cool stuff one way or another. And this is a tool in the toolkit for doing that.
Yeah, and Alex, I know I said I wasn't going to sell ESOPs, and I'm still going to try not to, but
now you got to whack me up the side of the head and tell me.
I think the tax benefits, as you said before, can be really significant. I mean, for us, when we first learned about this, it felt like too good to be true. I mean, with a sufficiently patient owner, so a business like Revision that is a solid business and is profitable, but does not throw off cash because we are growing, and has never thrown off cash. So, the former owners never took any dollars off the table out of this business. The business essentially buys itself with tax savings. And so, it takes a little while, but it's really, really and truly almost entirely found money. And the employees essentially buy the business with tax savings over a course of time. And that is incredible, because it means you can sell to your employees without starving the business of the resources that it needs to continue to grow and be successful. And I don't know, I had to double and triple check the laws and the spreadsheets a dozen times, thinking there's got to be a trick here, right? This can't be this. This is good for everybody, right? I mean, yes, Erika, to your point, most founders who sell to ESOPs probably don't sell at the absolute highest price they could sell for, and so there probably is some concession there. There's lots of other upsides offsetting it, but it's just an absolutely amazing, powerful tool, and God bless the wisdom of whoever wrote this law 40 years ago in recognizing that all of our communities benefit when ownership is shared, and when, as you say, Alex, we have more capitalists, right? Because increasingly the country is going the opposite direction, where we have less capital and more disposable labor, and I think that's a huge shame.
I would argue that that the ESOP probably gave me the valuation techniques, which is largely a discounted cash flow analysis. Probably gave me better value than in a small business, a $7-10 million business. For private buyers, even for people looking to roll up if it were available, everybody wants a deal, and they want to, part of their role is to get something for the best possible value. So they're always driving the logics of why it isn't as valuable as you might think it is. And the discounted cash flow method and I think gives you a better chance at a value. You've got to explain all the important logics and reasons why your business can indeed perform, and you've got to justify long-term projections, and that's a financial rigor that your organization has to have if you're going to consider ESOP. But I would argue that the value that can be obtained is, in my case, and certainly other small businesses potentially, is better in the ESOP valuation methods than it is in a private sale, for instance.
Yeah, you may be right. There may be more private equity sharks shopping for solar companies than shopping for hot tub companies.
And they're going to be out there and they're going to flip your company in 7 years. They're going to extract value for themselves. Again, that's how the system works. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying it's not for everybody. And there's this sort of longer term sustainable alternative. Why doesn't everybody do it? That's Bobby's question, and I think it's exactly the right question. I think not everybody does it because, one, you can often, not everybody, but you can often find more money with a strategic or PE kind of buyer, and that is just a really simple reason. There are more complicated reasons. The ESOP can take a while to kind of digest and get used to. Both of you gents have talked about that. It took a while to kind of figure out what this really meant and to get copacetic with it. And then you're kind of getting in business with the government. When you do a 401k plan, it's fun. You got to follow all the regs, but it's over there, and you don't have to worry about it. Now that plan owns your company. It's not going to manage your company, but you're accountable to something that has a lot of federal oversight and, of course, some costs associated with it. So relative to never dying, the ESOP is very, very expensive. Relative to any other alternative, it's kind of in the ballpark of selling your company any other way. So yeah, it costs money, but everything costs money. But it's the regulatory oversight and hassle that some people don't have patience with. And then you have a lot of people that really just want to hang up their spurs and, not worry about it anymore. And if they haven't built that transition team and that succession plan and that talent pipeline, then what do? Well, you sell it to somebody who has. So there are a variety of organizational, sometimes financial, sometimes perceived hassle, reasons that get in the way. And then finally, I think this is a small one, but I think it's bigger than it appears, which is that the advisory community, the CPAs and the attorneys, are sometimes thinking that what you want is the maximum dollar, and counseling people against ESOPs because they kind of don't understand them and they want to steer you to something that they do understand. And the business broker that wants your business is not going to make any money when you sell it to your workers. So the kind of advisory incentives in some ways are aligned. So if you add up all of those things, you can see it's just very easy for companies to never even know that this alternative exists. And I think if I step back and I say, what are we trying to do here today? We are not trying to convince you this is the right answer for you, although we're all ESOP zealots. We love this stuff. I hope it shows. But we don't want companies to do it for the wrong reasons. We want you to be aware of it. We want you to have it in your list of things to consider and not be afraid of it for the wrong reasons, not do it for the wrong reasons, but kind of eyes open. And I think if we have contributed to that conversation, then I'm really happy with the day today, because we want people don't do them because they don't know about them, and the more you know, the right people who have the right orientation toward this are going to choose this, and people who have other priorities are going to choose to do something else that fits better in their own context.
Well, we're getting near the end. I don't know if we've had a very attentive community here. I don't know if we have any last questions. I just want, before the last question, just want to thank everyone so much for taking the time this morning. I want to thank Jim and Fortunat and Alex for putting so much time into this and passion and telling really intimate details as well as philosophical details. I'm so pleased that we got experts on the call. We were so happy to have experts and people that are new to this field. And like I said, all of us will there's a great deck that Alex put together that has resources for all of you, all the contact information for each of us. And And we hope you'll come back to a Conscious Capitalism event. We have a couple great ones coming up. We just launched a new website. So if you go to our website, there will be more, but the next two are coming up, I think, led by Elizabeth and Tara, who are on this call, are co-founders. And we just wanted to thank you so much. Any other burning last thoughts from either a question or from our panelists? I know Fortunat has to go and testify in Augusta, which means a click to another Zoom in a minute, but
You know, I guess the last thing I'd like to add is I welcome the opportunity to, at no expense, free of charge, to sit down and chat with. There are a number of people who did that for me as I considered the path. And so I believe it's my obligation to those companies who are considering this to serve equally. I've had a chance to do that on a number of occasions in the last 6 months, and I welcome it. So I think my contact information, emails, and phone numbers are somewhere for any and everybody.
it is.
They'll be
Thanks
in
so
the
much.
PowerPoint deck at the back. There's a slide with all the contact information.
And I also wanted to thank Darren and Nick, they're producers. They're professionals and board members. It's all volunteer Conscious Capitalism, but they've been co-producers on this, so I want to thank them too. So we are at 9:30. Thank you all so much. It was great spending the morning with you. We'll see you again soon.